Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I will be reviewing the second book in the John Wayne Cleaver series by Dan Wells, Mr. Monster. This is a horror series. It's done in two trilogies from what I understand, a total of 6 books by horror author Dan Wells. You probably know him from the podcast Writing Excuses, or where I know him from, the Intentionally Blank podcast that he does with my favorite author, Brandon Sanderson. And I picked up the first book in this series, I Am Not a Serial Killer, earlier this year when I got to meet Dan Wells at the GalaxyCon in Raleigh, North Carolina, which was an absolute blast. I got to spend almost 45 minutes talking with Mr. Wells, and he was just a delight to meet. And we had a lot of fun conversation. And I picked up I bought these first 2 books from him, gifted another book of his to someone, and I read the first book earlier this year before I had started my YouTube channel, and I very much enjoyed this book. I thought it was a strong book. I am not a well-versed person in the horror genre. It's not a genre I particularly love, particularly movies. I've watched several horror movies and I just don't enjoy them. And I picked up this book purely on the fact that it was written by Dan Wells. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I wasn't sure how excited I'd be for the sequel. I had heard the sequel was much more graphic and the sequel wasn't as good. This one was more unique. And I picked up the sequel because I was interested. And boy, am I thankful I picked up the sequel, because this book is amazing. I'm going to tip my hat now on my rating, kind of. This is one of my favorite books I've read this year. This was utterly fantastic. So I don't have much horror experience. I've read a book last year called Invasive, which is about killer ants by Chuck Wendig. And then, of course, I Am Not a Serial Killer. And I don't, off the top of my head, know if I've done other horror novels. I'd have to check somewhere in my archive. But as far as I know, that's the only 3 I've read. And this by far takes the cake. This was an utterly amazing novel. Near perfect, I would say. The first thing I'll say about this book is it has fantastic humor. I was not expecting there to be great humor. There were some funny lines in I Am Not a Serial Killer, some good moments of levity, yes, but this book had fantastic humor. And it got to the point that I was guffawing out loud at some of the lines. And Dan Wells just has joke after joke after joke. It was perfectly executed at times, and I was surprised to find myself laughing. A lot of the jokes are very morbid jokes, and yet they work in the book because not only do they diffuse the tension among the reader, but they diffuse the tension among the characters as well, because they're in-universe jokes. And so I thoroughly was enjoying that moment of it. The humor of this book is what kept me going from the first half into the second half. The first half is very light in that there's death happening, but it's not graphic. It's not on every page. It's not in every chapter, but the humor is what's keeping you going. And then the second half of the book is the main plot, kicking in full speed. It's a very short book. It's 280 pages. I read it in 2 days, mostly because I was speeding through it because it was utterly fascinating. If I had had the time, I would have read. This is one of those books I would have read in one day, in one really big sitting, if I had been able to work it out. I sadly was not able to, so it took me 2 days, but it's so fast-paced. Some of the beats towards the beginning of the book are predictable, but yet it's a fun predictability, and it feels refreshing to have that in a horror book. One of the beats of predictability in the first half of the book is Brooke, the romantic love interest to John Wayne Cleaver. You meet her at the beginning of the book, and slowly something between her and John starts to form, and you start seeing them start going out on dates together, and they're really cute as a couple, and you find out that she kind of really works for him, and him for her. And so I was really enjoying their dynamic. The dynamic with her dad and the few pages he was on was fun. The dynamic with them and their friends or really more like her friends, he doesn't really have friends, was good. And the family dynamic at the house was good. And so she brought that breath of fresh air. She was where a lot of that humor was coming in. And so that was really entertaining. And then you have another aspect of the book that I think was really good, which was the second half, which is the full plot. And that would be getting into spoilers, so I won't get into spoilers. I'll say the villain is introduced, or at least you learn who the villain is. They start doing horrendous things. The book takes a major turn in the second half of the book. The second half of the book is really escape from blank. And I found it utterly fascinating. My problem with the first book was that so much of the book is John learning and hunting the bad guy. And as a result, and especially I didn't like how they handled the bad guy, and I was just frustrated that I was like, we spent so long hunting him, and then the climax of the book is him in their final battle. This book, it is much more happenstance. John happens to find out who the villain is and thus gets trapped in a sort of way. And it's about John saving the day, not only for himself, but for some complete strangers. And he has to try not to reveal his sociopathic tendencies, while at the same time he wants to save them because he's a good person in that sense of the term. And I loved the heroism that the second half of the book produced. It could have gone a much darker and much more brutal, violent sort of way. And there is some gore in this book. Not as much as I expected, though. I read in reviews that this one I thought was way toned down compared to I Am Not a Serial Killer. And I thought it fit better in here. And I liked what I was reading because it seemed more heroic. This book, I was rooting for John, but I felt bad that I was rooting for John. In this book, I am rooting for John, absolutely. I thought that everything that John did in the book was just brilliant. In the second half, I loved the way you see him figuring out how to solve problems. He doesn't just have the solution. He fails many times, but he learns from those failures and starts doing better the next time he tries to stop the villain. And it just culminates in an awesome finale of climax where there's 2 big twists. Actually, maybe 3 big twists if you think about it. And in the moment, I didn't count all of them, but by the end, I was like, oh, this is how this boom, 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 this is gonna happen. And I mostly got it right. The denouement of the book is very heroic and tragic at the same time, but it's still a great denouement, and it sets up book 3 real well. And so my one issue I will say with the book is that in the denouement, he makes a decision with a certain character. And I did not want him to make that decision for dramatic storytelling purposes. I completely understand why Wells would make that choice. I disagree with it. I think that he should go in a different direction. I would liken this to a decision that I believe that Brandon Sanderson would make, a good friend of Wells who blurbed this book. If Brandon Sanderson was writing this book, he would have gone in the other direction with this certain character. And I would have liked that better because that's the type of story I prefer. I'm not knocking Wells in this regard and saying that I think this was a bad decision. I just didn't like the decision he made. So therefore, even though I'm knocking the book slightly, it is ever so slightly. And I do not think that should hamper your enjoyment or hamper your willingness to read this book, because it is absolutely and thoroughly brilliant. And so because of all that, I would give Mr. Monster a 9.8 out of 10. One of the best books I've read this year. It was very excellent and very well done. I'm very impressed, Mr. Wells. You did a good job. So if you've read this book or this series, tell me, what did you think of it? Did you see all the twists happening? Do the next ones get better? Did you like this one better? Let me know your thoughts on the series as a whole. Please subscribe to the channel. I'll definitely be reviewing more books in this series and books of all other genres as well. And please like this video and hit the notification bell. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.